Welcome to Shooting Straight with AimEnough.com. I'm Frank Miniter, the editor-in-chief of the NRA's America's First Freedom. Today we have the incredible pleasure of again speaking with John Lott. Now, no doubt you know who John Lott is. His book, More Guns, Less Crime, burst him onto the scene in the 1990s, and he's written a lot of great books since. He's also the founder and president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. You can find them at crimeresearch.org. As the editor of America's First Freedom, I often use their data, their research, for articles that you'll see in the magazine. But today we want to talk about the politicalization of our crime data as it is going on. Now, John, just the other day, after Hunter Biden was convicted of gun charges, of gun crimes, his father, President Joe Biden, went to a gun control group, Everytown for Gun Safety, a Gun Sense University thing to give a speech. And in that speech, he began it by saying that the year before he was president, that murder rate grew faster or more than it ever has in history. Whereas in the last year, it has fallen more than it ever has in history. Now, this, of course, from the very beginning is cherry picking the data, being that we're talking about before 2020 and after 2020 and the crime surge that happened during that pandemic. But there's also some other spin going on there. I'm hoping you could step right into that.
Well, I mean, during the first year of COVID, there was a big increase in murder rates. You kind of expect things would normally kind of come back down after an unusual case like that because the pandemic obviously has been over. Obviously, there are lots of other things that happened that affected crime rates in general, from Black Lives Matter, cuts in police budgets, changes in police rules, left-wing district attorneys who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals, and liberal judges who during 2020, 2021, and even 2022 would release large percentages of inmates from local jails. I mean, in some urban areas, you had half, even 2/3 of the inmates being released. So it's not too surprising that you had increases in crime rates that were occurring. What I think's happened is while murder rates have fallen recently, overall violent crime has soared. I mean, in property crime, people go to the local CVS, they go to the Walgreens, and they see that, there's glass up in front of things that they want to go and buy. They have to go and call a salesperson over to stand with them, unlock it, and stand with them while they read the ingredients on the packages that they're looking at. They know that wasn't true a few years ago. Things have definitely changed. To me, the most important thing is how law enforcement generally in this country has just completely collapsed, particularly for other violent crimes other than murders. But, you look at the arrest rates for violent crimes in large cities. It's gone from 44% pretty consistently prior to 2020, started falling in 2020, and by 2022, according to the FBI data, the arrest rate was down to 20% for reported crimes. Had an even bigger drop in property crime arrest rates during that period of time. And it's not surprising to me that when you're not catching these criminals and you're not punishing, you're going to see an increase in violent crime. And so what most people focus on are the FBI reported crime data. But we know most crimes aren't reported to police. And we also know, and we've known for a long time, that when things like the arrest rates fall, when people don't believe that criminals are going to be caught and punished, you actually see a drop in the rate that people report crimes to the police. And so, you look at the FBI data for 2022, and they showed a 2% drop in reported violent crime, whereas the National Crime Victimization Survey, which surveys 240,000 people a year, showed a 42% increase in violent crime that occurred at the same time. So I know a lot of people and the media and the Democrats want to go and point to the FBI crime data, but there's other government data that is more reliable, and at least in terms of getting total crime data. I mean, the FBI doesn't even pretend to measure total crimes with their reported crimes, uh, has gone up tremendously over that same period of time. And there's also issues even with reported crime data. While the FBI showed a 2% drop in reported crime, the National Crime Victimization data showed a 29% increase in reported crime. And there are lots of reasons, I think, for that. One reason is I don't think most people understand that simply calling 911 doesn't get the crime on the reported list. And what's happened in a number of police jurisdictions now that wasn't true even a few years ago is you'll call up 911 and the dispatcher will ask you if it's an emergency, which means literally is the criminal there committing a crime. And if people say, no, the crime was committed 10 minutes ago, the criminal's left, what they'll be told is, well, you can come down to the police station and you can fill out a report. Whereas in past years, a police officer would have been dispatched to the home and would have taken a report that was there. Some people now who would have put in a report because the police would have come out to their home now aren't going to do that because now they have to go down to the police station to go and do the report. And on top of that, they're being told many times that, well, even if you come down and even if you fill out this police report, there's a good chance we're not going to be able to catch the guy and punish him. So you get some people now who say, look, it's just not worth my time to go and do this because it's more costly for me to do it and it's unlikely that anything's going to happen. We also have another problem, and that is we've had these left-wing district attorneys which are downgrading a lot of the crime. So you've had, you take Alvin Bragg, who's been in the news recently, 60% of the cases that he's had, he's downgraded the penalties. And most of those, almost all of those, are downgrading cases from a felony to a misdemeanor. The most common one are aggravated assaults being moved down to simple assault. Aggravated assaults are in the FBI crime reported data. Simple assaults aren't. The big difference between the two is whether a weapon's used. If a weapon is used like a gun, then that would be an aggravated assault. And a lot of these left-wing district attorneys are refusing to prosecute people for weapons offenses. Regular criminals. I mean, they'll go after law-abiding citizens for weapons offenses. And the problem that you face is that while downgrading that from an aggravated offense to a simple assault will make it so it's no longer included in the FBI measure of violent crime. It will still be included in the National Crime Victimization data. And the reason is because, they'll ask you like 40 different questions about, what crime, where it occurred, when it occurred, the characteristics of the criminal, how you responded, what the final outcome was. And then they'll also ask you whether you reported the crime. And the thing is, if I go and I tell the National Crime Victimization data that, the guy assaulted me and he had a gun, the National Crime Victimization data will report that as an aggravated assault. Whereas the FBI data, since it was downgraded, that's not going to be in a violent crime for the FBI.
Who puts together that
that's
survey?
Just another example of the problem there.
The National Victimization Survey, who puts that together?
The Department of Justice. It's by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So they're both, the FBI is in the Department of Justice. The Bureau of Justice Statistics is in the Department of Justice. And so, it's just two different parts of the same department.
So the police are arresting much fewer people, half or less than half of the people that they were in major places. George Soros-backed district attorneys are not prosecuting people in many of these places. And then the data is suspect for various other reasons that you're citing. Isn't it also true that some of the major cities have not given their data in recent years to the FBI's reports?
Right. Well, in 2022, 31% of police departments around the country weren't reporting their data to the FBI. That was even worse in 2021, where 37% weren't reporting it. Prior to that, about 97% of police departments were, so only 3% were. So there's a huge change in 2021. Uh, in 2022, you had police departments like for New York City and Los Angeles that had stopped reporting. Now, the FBI doesn't just put zeros down when they don't report. They try to estimate the crimes. I think they probably have done a pretty poor job of estimating the number of crimes that are there. But,
Why that huge
that's,
fall given 1 year? Did the forms change or something else, and
yeah,
mandates change
right.
from the agency?
Yeah, no, well, they started a new system, the NIBUS system that's there. And, but, you can go to CompStat data for Los Angeles and for New York City, and you can easily get the data. The data is still collected. It's just that a number of places just haven't been reporting that data to the FBI. Over time, presumably more of them will, but that's a pretty large percentage, and you have a very large police departments where the vast majority of violent crime is occurring. I'll just give you one number that I probably should have given earlier that I think kind of puts in sharp contrast. You look at these large cities, and these drops have been occurring across all cities, but you look at these large cities and you look at arrests as a percentage of all violent crime reported and unreported. Only 8% of violent crime in those cities results in arrest. Only 1% of property crimes, both reported and unreported, result in arrest. These are just mind-boggling low numbers. So you have real problems that occur, essentially, particularly for property crimes, but even for violent crimes. The risk to criminals getting caught are essentially zero. And, the irony is at the same time that Biden, refuses to criticize these district attorneys who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals, and he's refusing to criticize these liberal judges around the country. He also and other Democrats want to make it difficult and costly for law-abiding citizens to be able to go and protect themselves. And so, one can argue at least he's being consistent. He doesn't want the legal system to make it risky for criminals to commit crime. And he also doesn't want to make it so that victims of crime make it risky for criminals to commit crime.
Right, he's blaming the good citizens for the crimes by the criminals who are being often let go by George Soros-backed prosecutors in some cities.
Right, exactly.
It's just astounding to me. Another stat that grabbed me that you mentioned to me not long ago was the number of active murderers, as I'll call them, who are stopped by armed citizens, but the FBI data on that topic being pretty suspect.
Right. Well, there's something called the active shooting reports that the FBI puts out every year. An active shooting case is a case where a gun's fired in public at somebody, not part of some other type of crime like a robbery or a gang fight over drug turf. It could be anything from one person being shot at and missed all the way up to a mass public shooting. And this data from the FBI has been used to claim that civilians rarely stop these types of active shooting cases, people who are legally carrying permanent concealed handguns. And I was tasked with looking at this when I was at the Department of Justice. And it's just amazing the number of cases that they miss or misclassify. And the errors that they make systematically miss cases where law-abiding citizens with permanent concealed handgun stopped these attacks. The FBI claims over the 9 years from 2014 through 2022 that only about 4.6% of these active shooting cases were stopped by citizens with concealed carry permit. We've gone through, we find that it's 36%. It's actually about 40% if you just take the most recent year, there, 2022. But one argument that I had when I was at the Department of Justice, I said, look, you have to separate out attacks in places where guns are banned versus ones where people are allowed to have them. You know, these gun-free zones, you can't expect law-abiding citizens to be around to go and stop attacks in places where it's illegal for them to go and have guns. And when you do that, you find over 60% of these active shooting cases are stopped by law-abiding citizens. So that's, you know, whether it's 36% or what I think is a much more reasonable number, 60% of cases where people are legally allowed to carry. That's a lot different from 4.6% that the FBI puts out. And, you know, even in the past, when I've gotten the FBI to admit that they've missed cases, they have refused to fix them. It's just incredible to me that, and nobody needs to take my word for this. On our website at crimeresearch.org, we list out the cases that they missed or misclassified. And so people can go and double check them themselves to see whether or not they fit the definition that's there.
So they're not even interested in fixing the numbers as you show them the glaring errors.
No, because they have unfortunately, they have a political agenda, I think, there. And, you know, I think if the data changes would go in another direction, I think they'd go in that direction. I have to tell you, I've worked in the federal government twice. In the 1980s, I was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission. And more recently, I was senior advisor for research and statistics in the Department of Justice, in the Office of Justice Programs, and then in the Office of Legal Policy. And, you know, it was, I guess one of the most shocking things to me was just how politicized the Department of Justice is. I mean, a lot of people have talked about the selective prosecutions. They've talked about the FBI generally. I can't speak to those areas because I wasn't directly involved, but I can speak about what it was like dealing with the data people at the FBI. And they're true believers in left-wing, ideology that's there. Now, I have to say, one problem that occurred during the Trump administration is that Trump is kind of an olive branch to George W. Bush. Let Bush appoint pretty much everybody in, at least initially, in the Department of Justice. And that was a big mistake. And I'm sure that's a mistake that Trump will not make a second time. But you had a situation where you had not only the civil servants in the Department of Justice being left-wing and working against what you would care about, but you also had the political appointees doing all sorts of crazy things. The National Institute of Justice, for example, during the first 3 years of the Trump administration, gave out 45% more money for firearms research than the last 3 years of the Obama administration. And every single dollar went to left-wing gun control advocates. There was a guy named David Mulhausen. I had a conversation with him one time where I was trying to push him on that. And his attitude was he hated Trump so much that, and even though in the past, when I knew him at Heritage, he had been a pretty good guy, at least on gun issues. He hated Trump so much that he wanted to go and fund these anti-gun studies because he wanted the Department of Justice to come out and say that Trump was wrong on issues like gun-free zones and what have you. Again, I don't think I'm sure that Trump won't make that mistake again to let somebody like the Bushes.
But as we look at the data and we're moving toward this election on November 5th, what do you see that it could be done differently as far to, arrest more criminals, that sort of thing, could be done to actually lower the crime rates instead of just spinning the numbers the way, unfortunately, Biden is now doing?
Well, look, law enforcement is overwhelmingly a local issue. The number of police you hire, the rules that you have that the police engage in, the district attorneys are elected locally, judges are elected locally. Uh, all those things are done locally. If you want to go and change this, you're going to have to make it so that elections have consequences. You're going to have to elect different people in these areas. Um, and it's a combination of fixing all these things. I mean, for a while, Biden was strongly in favor of defund the police, cutting the number of police. After a couple years in office, he started talking about, having more police. But you can't just have more police, and you have to prosecute people, and you have to sentence them to real penalties once you've caught them. And you will look in vain for anything that Biden could say on those topics. What Biden doesn't understand is that 92% of violent crime has absolutely nothing to do with guns. And the way you reduce violent crime, whether it's violent crime without guns or violent crime with guns, is what you're just saying. You have to make it so that it's risky for criminals to go and commit crimes. Higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences. And I would also add, making it and encouraging law-abiding citizens to be able to go and protect themselves. That also makes it risky. And there's a reason why you look at surveys of police. Police have been very strong supporters of the private ownership of guns. You have about 76% of police, according to Police One, which believe that private ownership of guns are either extremely or very important in reducing crime. Over 90% of police officers strongly support very liberal concealed carry laws in the country. And so, um, you know, I, you just have to make it risky in many different areas. And Biden, as you say, doesn't seem to understand that.
Well, according to the latest data from the National Shooting Sports Foundation, 22.3 million Americans have decided to become gun owners since the election in 2020. I'm wondering what effect, and if you have anything to say, and what impact that could have on this next election.
Well, I mean, I think it changes people's views. I think if you're a disarmed individual, you feel more dependent upon the government to go and try to fix things. But look, there's a reason why police are such strong supporters of private ownership of guns. Look, anybody who's read my academic research knows that I think police are the single most important factor for reducing crime. But police themselves understand that they virtually always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occur. And the question then is, what's the safest course of action? And having a gun is by far the safest course of action for people to be able to go and protect themselves. And if my research convinces me of anything, it's the most vulnerable people in our society who benefit the most from having guns. There's basically two groups of people. One are the people who are the most likely victims of violent crime, and that overwhelmingly tends to be poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas. And the second group are people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. You're almost always talking about a young male doing the attack. And when a woman has a gun, it makes a much bigger relative change in her ability to protect herself than it does for a man to have a gun. They'll both benefit. And, you will look in vain for any similar discussion from Biden or the Democrats. Their rules are precisely ones that will make it risky for those very people to be able to go and protect themselves, which is too bad. Now, generally, you mentioned the increase in gun ownership. I have problems with the data on gun ownership because it's usually from surveys, and there's issues we can talk about with regard to it. But the one hard data that we have are a number of concealed carry permits. And you look at over the last decade, you've seen the growth rate for women getting concealed carry permits being over 100% faster than for men. And for blacks, it's like 200% faster than it's been for whites. So it's been those very groups of people who benefit the most that we've seen having changes. And I think that's extremely important. Look, if you have concealed carry permits, um, if you're going to reduce crime, you have to have the people where the crime's occurring getting the permits. You look at a
Mm.
state like Illinois where it costs over $400 to get a concealed carry permit in terms of the fees, the training costs that are there, and there are other difficulties. So who gets a permit? It's basically relatively well-to-do people who live in the suburbs. You look at a state like neighboring Indiana, where 23% of the adult population is a permit. The cost of getting a permit there, because there's not even a charge for the background checks, is literally zero. And of course, now even they're a constitutional carry state. But if you just look at the permits, in Illinois, it's basically relatively wealthier people who live in the suburbs. In Indiana, you see a lot higher concealed carry permit rate in zip codes, which are heavily Black, relatively poor areas. Well, you can have 100% of the people in a county where there's zero crime carrying permanent concealed handguns, and you're not going to see any change in the crime rate that's going to be occurring. You got to have the people in the areas where there's crime having it so that it makes it riskier for criminals to go and attack people in those areas. And, unfortunately, the types of costs that the Biden administration's trying to put in terms of making it more costly for people to buy guns in many different ways, disarm poor individuals who benefit the most from having guns.
Right. With 29 constitutional carry states, it must be harder for you to count the number of concealed carriers in this nation, I'd imagine.
For a long time, when you had a state move to constitutional carry, you still saw permits increasing, even though it didn't increase as quickly as the states that didn't adopt constitutional carry. And part of the reason may have been if you're going to go to a neighboring state or something, you'd want to have a concealed carry permit. But now that this year we'll have 29 states with constitutional carry, you're beginning to see significant drops in the number of concealed carry permits in the constitutional carry states, though it's still been increasing in the other states that don't have constitutional carry. And
Well, I don't have any remorse that it's harder for you to get the data because the government doesn't belong, shouldn't be between us and our freedom. That's why we have a Second Amendment. Yeah, I know you're not. I just wanted to hit that point too.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Look, there's I'm an economist, and so I look at everything as costs and benefits. But, there are obviously big benefits from constitutional carry. The two big benefits that I point to is, one, let's say a woman's being stalked or threatened. It may take 60 or 90 days, or in some places even much longer, for her to get a concealed carry permit. She might not even be able to wait a couple days to be able to go and protect herself. It's not like she can go and tell the threat, can you come back in 3 months? I'll be able to have my permanent concealed handgun at that point. And so constitutional carry allows her to immediately be able to go and protect herself. A lot of states, you have to go and get training, and then it may be another 60 or 90 days after you've gotten the training. It may take 30 days for you to get the approved training. And she may already know how to use a gun. She may already have that capability, but she hasn't done the formal class that's there. And the other issue is just the cost. I mentioned Illinois, the costs there. In a lot of states, it could be $100 or $80 to go and get a concealed carry permit. That may not stop you or I from being able to go and get it. But if you're talking about the people who benefit the most from being able to get it, $100 may make the difference between whether or not they're going to be able to legally carry a gun for protection. So I think those are big benefits from constitutional carry. The one cost I'd point to is the fact that when I debate people, and this has to do with the data issue, um, gun control advocates have frequently said, well, look at crimes committed by permit holders. Well, my response is that it's an incredibly low rate. I mean, it's like infinitesimal. Uh, you find permit holders being convicted of firearms related crimes at 1/12 the rate that police officers are convicted, and only 1/240th the rate that the general population is convicted of firearms related crimes. These are an extremely law abiding group of people that are there. Well, the only way I can go and show that is by looking at concealed carry permits that are issued to know the number of crimes and the number of people who are carrying. Um, I can't really do that too well with constitutional carry. I can go and look at what happens to, uh, you know, the overall crime rate that are there, but I can't deal with the behavior of those who are carrying because I don't know. Now, one thing I will say is this last year we paid for a survey to be done, and we found that about 15.6% of likely voters in the United States were legally carrying most or all of the time. That's up tremendously from about 5.7% or so that Pew Research had had in a similar survey in 2017. So I think what's happened is that we've had people know that ultimately they have to defend themselves. There's one other point I should make, and that is one of the reasons why I think we've seen a lot of states move to constitutional carry in the last few years has been because of what happened during COVID. You had 20 states that basically stopped issuing concealed carry permits during COVID. So you had this big spike in crime, this big demand for people being able to go and protect themselves, and then finding that essentially the window was closed in terms of issuing concealed carry permits. So you had states like Florida, for example, where Nikki Fried, the Democrat who was the Agricultural Commission, they had concealed carry permits in that part of the government, uh, just refused to issue permits during COVID. And so that helped move Florida towards adopting it because people saw that, you can't always depend upon the government, even if you're willing to wait the 60 or 90 days or however long it takes to get a permit, to be able to go and obtain it, despite what might be happening to big increases in crime rates.
Right, son. So I mentioned your website, your organization, which people can find at crimeresearch.org in the beginning of this. And I want to point people back there again and tell me anything else that's going to pop up there soon that's exciting that people should look at.
Well, I guess I don't want to tell people too much about what we're working on. We put up studies. We just had a study that I wish people would download and read. I mean, there's been this academic debate on the impact that concealed carry laws have on crime rates. Most of the research has found that it falls, but you've had a few persistent gun control academics who want to go and argue it increases. And so they've made several claims about why that could be the case. One is that concealed carry permit holders, you give somebody a permit, they'll commit a crime, even though obviously they had to pass a background check to be able to go and get the permit. That's pretty easy to deal with. You and I have just talked about that. They claim that if you issue more concealed carry permits, there will be more gun theft, and we deal with that. And people can see that, in fact, there's no relationship. You are carrying a gun, you have one less gun that may be at home that somebody could break in during the day when you're there if you're not allowed to carry and to take it. I would argue the gun thefts that you likely have are because people maybe had to leave it in a car because of gun-free zones that were there. So to the extent that there is anything, it's because of different rules that are unfortunately in place to create these gun-free zones. But the point is on net, there's no increase that you see there in terms of crime. And then the third thing that they bring up is that somehow this interferes with the operation that police do and that gets in the way of police. Obviously, as I mentioned, surveys of police are extremely sympathetic to people carrying concealed handguns. So the police themselves don't believe that. Of course, that doesn't stop these left-wing academics from claiming that. And so we look at
Yeah.
what happens to arrest rates as you see a change in the number of concealed carry permits. And it doesn't have the bad effect that people claim. And so, or at least they think occurs. And
Well, those
so,
claims don't equate with reality with me. I've even had to turn around and I've got to a place, a fair, a county fair, that kind of thing, when they said I can't carry, and I didn't have the safe in my truck at the time. I would turn around and go home, bring my concealed carry gun home if I was going to go back to go to that fair because my son really wanted to go, that kind of thing.
right.
So no, we're reacting to these things in that way. I just, yeah, you're saying about those academics just doesn't equate with my experience.
Well, I'm not, for somebody to tell me that these academics are divorced from the real world, I just find shocking. Look, that's the reason why we do the research. And by the way, if people go and download our paper and look at it, the more downloads these research papers get, the more it kind of forces these other academics to go and deal with the types of research that we do. So I'll just give you an example. You look at this gun theft stuff. The study that was done on the other side that's been getting attention, they don't even measure exactly the number of guns that are stolen. They look at the price of illegal guns, which isn't even just necessarily related to the number of guns available. It's you have supply and demand doing it. And also you have changes in the types of guns over time. I mean, God only knows what's happening with the changes in the price of guns. And so we look at actually the number of guns reported as being stolen. And the other thing is they treat all concealed carry laws as the same, whether it's constitutional carry or whether it's, a state like Illinois or Indiana. And so, as we talked about earlier in this discussion, there's huge differences in the percentage of adult population that have a concealed carry permit. And obviously, in constitutional carry states, it's even a higher percentage of people who are carrying. And so, you want to go in and directly relate the percentage of the adult population carrying with the rate of guns being stolen. And that's what we do in our study as compared to others that don't even measure the number of guns stolen and just assume the percentage of people carrying in all these different states is exactly the same. So it's just kind of crazy. So
I think the
hopefully,
honesty is what drives them craziest there, John. But thank you for your time today.
oh no, well, thank you for being there, Frank. You do a very important job. I really appreciate you being there and your friendship. Thank you.